There's a section of the Old Testament that a lot of people just skimmed over, and a lot of other people don't even know existed. For a long time, I didn't know that this section, one, existed, and two, was so important, so pivotal, not only in Israel's history, but just history in general. Today, we're going to talk about the Babylonian Exile. Now, Babylon was a great nation, known for its riches, its innovation, its architecture, its expansion. It was an enormous empire. The power that it brought, the military forces that it forged, it was undeniable that this empire was one of the great ones in the ancient world. And they were known for a lot of things. Their mathematics. They're the reason why we use 60 minutes to an hour and 60 seconds to a minute. Their astrology and astronomy. And like I said, a lot of their architecture. They house the Hanging Garden, which is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But more importantly, they were savages when it comes to conquering. They would throw conquest and just overtake nations like it was a side quest. And I'm here to discuss one of their notorious side quests when they conquered the nation of Israel, which marks a part of the Bible that we call the Babylonian Exile. This is when they went into the land, they pillaged it, they destroyed it, they burned Solomon's temple. It was a huge moment that brought them back to being slaves like they were in Egypt. Around 931 BC, around the time of King Solomon's death. Remember, it was first Saul, he was the first king of Israel. And then King David took over, and then his son King Solomon took over all of Israel. But then Solomon had a son named Rehoboam. And they all thought that Rehoboam was going to come and be gentle and wise and, just prosper like his father did. But instead, he caused a lot of fear in his people. And he caused a lot of grief. He caused a lot of uncertainty. He just wanted to throw his power around. And that's not what Israel wanted, nor were they used to it. So they actually wanted to appoint a new king, which oddly enough, his name was Jeroboam, he came from the line of Ephraim, right? So you got the 12 tribes, and we're following the line of David, which he comes from Judah's line. That was one of the 12 tribes. Judah was one of the 12 tribes. But when they saw that Rehoboam was kind of like throwing around his power a little too harshly, they wanted to appoint Jeroboam through that tribe of Ephraim. And Rehoboam wanted no part of this. Like a real Game of Thrones moment. He was like, nah. And then boom, the split happened. So Israel as a whole got split into 2 parts, pretty much even down the middle. The northern part was called Israel, just kind of kept his name. And the southern part was called Judah. And I'm pretty sure you can tell who reigned what kingdom. In the southern kingdom of Judah, Rehoboam reigned. And that's where the capital Jerusalem sat, in the southern kingdom. In the northern kingdom, Israel, Jeroboam reigned. And he sat in the capital of Samaria. Now this split continued for generations, centuries. So that took place in 931 BC. Now we're in 722 BC. And this was a crazy moment in Israel when the northern kingdom, they were kind of high in status, they were Israel. They had the God of heaven on their side. So a lot of countries or nations or providences, they wanted to test Israel and their gods. So Israel got into a lot of battles, a lot of wars. And they got into one really bad one with another great empire at the time, Assyria. Now Assyria came to the northern kingdom, destroyed it. They took over, it took a few battles, right? But once they caught the capital, Samaria, it was game over. They had to give it up. So what happened? The great exile to Assyria happened. So a lot of those Israelites were sent to Assyria, a lot of them enslaved, a lot of them killed, and they were scattered across the empire. And this moment is called the 10 lost tribes of Israel, because they took 10 out of the 12 tribes of Israel and scattered them across the Assyrian empire. And they actually repopulated a lot of that northern kingdom, specifically the capital, Samaria, with foreigners, which led to the birth of the Samaritans. And that's kind of talked about in the New Testament a lot. The Samaritans are basically like foreigners, immigrants. They were kind of like not viewed in a good way, even in Jesus' time. That's where the Good Samaritan comes in. You know, Jesus kind of broke that division. So like I said, we're in the year 722 BC. These accounts are recorded in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 18. And the first part, back when the split happened, that was in 1 Kings, chapter 12. So at this point, Israel was in a devastating place. They were very vulnerable because the northern kingdom was already taken. And since the southern kingdom was still alive, they were still in a tough place, because they knew that they were weakened. They knew they lost 10 out of their 12 tribes. And even though back in, you know, all the kings that came in and reigned over the northern kingdom or the southern kingdom, division did happen, but they helped each other a lot. There were certain kings from the northern kingdom that would, you know, team up with the southern kingdom on certain conquests, maybe taking over the Moabites. So it was like a house that was divided. It's like when you have a brother and you bug him, you just bug him all day. You guys fight, you guys throw stuff at each other. Like my kids fight, you know, they fight a good amount, and they loving each other a lot too. But anybody that has a sibling, I know that whenever you go out in public or you go out in school or you're hanging out with their friends or your friends, and somebody attacks that sibling, you're just like, whoa, bro. Step back, stand down. You don't want this problem. And they're like, what? You make fun of him all the time. It's like, yeah, but that's my sibling. I get to. That's kind of how the northern and the southern kingdom, Israel and Judah, were. They would get into fights. They would, you know, there would be a little petty stuff going on between the two kingdoms. But once there was an outside kingdom trying to mess with them, no, they team up. There was plenty of occasions that they teamed up. So fast forward, now the year is 597 BC. And this is the time when King Zedekiah of the southern kingdom was reigning. Now he had an oath with Babylon, with King Nebuchadnezzar II, where they would pay tribute to Babylon. And this happened a lot in the ancient world. Bigger kingdoms left smaller kingdoms alone, as long as they pay a little something, as long as they're benefiting off of that smaller kingdom. They had a sworn allegiance, and Babylon told them, you are never to form an alliance with Egypt. Well, Zedekiah kind of wanted a way out, kind of made his own decision, kind of made his own path. Just like all of us. We feel something, we go for it. We don't really get any confirmation. We just feel it and we go with it. So he felt it. So he decided to stop paying tribute to King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Not only that, but he sought military support from Egypt, the place where Nebuchadnezzar was like, hey, don't talk to them. Stick with me. we can have a good thing going. Just pay your tributes. And the prophet Jeremiah used to warn him about going against Babylon. And he mentioned them, don't go back to Egypt, which is kind of funny to me, because how are you gonna seek military support from the nation that was known of enslaving you? Hey, that didn't make sense in my part. Why would you even go that route? But he did. So what ended up happening was that Babylon seeked war on the southern kingdom. And like I said, they were already in pretty bad shape, pretty vulnerable. But Egypt did help out Judah during this time, just for not even a year. And even Jeremiah brings this up and he warns them. In Jeremiah chapter 2, he talks about this. He says, have you not done this to yourself by forsaking the Lord your God when he led you in the way? But now what are you doing on the road to Egypt? To drink waters of the Nile? Or what are you doing on the road to Assyria? To drink the waters of the Euphrates? Your own wickedness will correct you. He gave him that warning, but most of your major prophets, which are Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel, just about all of them took place in the exile. Not the whole book, but a lot of them. Like, for example, the beginning part of Daniel took place while he was in exile. Daniel was one of Nebuchadnezzar's right hands at the time, because he could interpret dreams, and he even warned Nebuchadnezzar on different kingdoms raising up and overtaking Babylon. So with those skills and those talents and those gifts from God, Nebuchadnezzar kept Daniel pretty much in line. But the book of Daniel is kind of funny in the way that he's in a good place, but then he gets thrown in the furnace with his two other friends, and then the people that threw him in would see a fourth figure, and that was God protecting him through the flames. And then later on, he's in good graces again. He's back in the action of the good graces of the king, and then he doesn't worship the same God that the king does, so once again throws him in the lion's den, and the lion doesn't touch him. The book of Daniel is written in a certain way that it kind of repeats the same events in two different sections. Yeah, the end of Isaiah was written during the exile, and Isaiah talks about a lot of comfort and predicting the return back to their homeland. And Lamentations was written during the time of the exile, and Lamentations is just a book on lamenting, just reflecting on deep sorrow on the destruction of Jerusalem. So I would highly recommend checking out those books and those sections that took place in the time of the exile, because the exile, you would think, is something that is so destructive and such a terrible thing, where they're getting sent to a foreign land to be enslaved. But you have to remember that God gave them so many warnings, sending these prophets and sending these men to give them the message that if they don't turn from their ways of false idolatry, then God may punish them. Now, the first warning should have been the Syrian taking over the northern kingdom. That should have told them, okay, well, God did that to them. Who's to say that's not going to happen to us? But they didn't listen. They didn't see the signs or any of that. So they ended up spending time in a foreign land. And what I found interesting is, I talked about before the genealogy of Jesus, and you would find a lot of these names written in that section of Matthew 1:1. But, recently I was questioning a lot on this fact that I found out that the Bible was written in 3 different languages, which is Hebrew. Most of the Old Testament is in Hebrew. All of the New Testament is in Greek, because Alexander the Great took over the multiple nations prior to Jesus Christ. So that was the common trading language. And then the third language, I'm like, what is this? I never even heard of that language, which is Aramaic, which is the language that Jesus actually spoke. And I'm like, where did this Aramaic, where in the Bible would they write Aramaic? I get it, writing Hebrew in the Old Testament and writing Greek in the New Testament, because those are 400 years apart from the last book of the Old Testament to the first book of the New Testament. It's about 400 years. And Babylon's native language was Aramaic. And I was like, okay, what does that got to do with anything? And then I realized that not only did these Israelites spend time in Babylon, which I later found out, but a lot of these books were written out of that exile in Babylon. And they were in Babylon for 70 years, which isn't really a long time compared to a lot of events in the Bible. But this is a time where they already established themselves. You know, they already got the promised land. They already built Jerusalem. They already had Israel, the nation. They already had the 12 tribes fully established. And then to lose it all, it was a very impactful time. Not only about, consequences, not following God and worshiping other gods. Your God can be whatever you worship. Money, women, technology, cars, sports, whatever you're worshiping is your God. And there's consequences to that. That's what that exile teaches us. But also, there's prediction of coming home. You're never too far to come back home. Because during that time, close to the 70 years, they were sent back. Why? Because the same visions that the prophet Daniel will tell Nebuchadnezzar about other nations taking over him happened. That's when Persia came and took over Babylon. And Persia let the Israelites go back home. Why? Because there was a decree back in the day of King Artaxerxes giving them land back. So the Persian king, King Cyrus, was looking at it and he was like, the king back in the day let them go back home. What should I do with them? I'm gonna let them go back home. So he let them go back home and rebuilt the temple. And he even gave them money and helped them out. And that's where the book of Nehemiah and Ezra come in. It's kind of like the contractor and then the architect. Ezra and Nehemiah, they form together and they rebuild Jerusalem. And that's another book that I want to get to in the future, because that's a good book. There's like prophecies about King Cyrus doing this, hundreds of years before Cyrus even existed. There's even some pretty funny letters that some of the people that didn't want Jerusalem and Israel to get rebuilt, that they'll send to the king and be like, yo, this is a nuisance city. They worship their own God. Trust me, if they fortify their place, you're in big trouble. And it's just a great book. I encourage you guys to look into the time of the exile of Babylon. And let me know what you think.